Look at this buck.
Oh my God. I'm talking a bullseye. A bush buck with a bow is so hard.
This is the biggest deer of my life. So big. Oh my God.
I got wires. Oh,
Easily my biggest whitetail.
what a
ever.
giant bull.
Thanks, babe.
No problem, babe.
I'm Josh Bowmar with Bowmar Bow Hunting, and we are starting a new series called the Bowmar Breakdown, where we break down our most iconic bow hunts. And on this week's episode, we are breaking down the biggest buck I've ever killed in Kansas. Actually, the only deer I've ever killed in Kansas. So let's get started.
I just smoked a giant. Oh my gosh, he was a monster.
Well, I killed this buck back in 2017, and honestly, 2017 was a really rough year for us. You know, we lost a lot of our hunting properties due to developments and people selling. It was just a bad year for us. So I was really relying on Kansas that year, and honestly, Kansas has not been good to us in years past. We've hunted quite a bit and just haven't had any luck on getting mature deer in front of us. And so I was hoping that this year was going to be different. So we actually went down there and set up a bunch of cameras early in October and trying to find, you know, a big deer. And we just didn't find a whole lot. We got a couple of them on camera that were good, but towards the end of October, we went and I put a bunch of scrapes, like mock scrapes up, and we went and set up a bunch of new cameras, and this big giant showed up. I couldn't believe it. At this point, I had not killed a 200-inch deer. This was like a dream deer of mine. I have always loved those big, wide, framey bucks. And the fact that he was so old, you could see by his big blocky head and his lot of mass with short tines, this deer was definitely ancient. You know, over 6 years old for sure. And my heart was set on him. And when you hunt out of state, and we lived in Ohio at the time, so that's a really long drive. So you only get to hunt, 4 to 5 days at a time, and then you pretty much got to go back to work, which was what our situation was. This was not an easy deer to target, for one, because he didn't show up much. But when you only have 4 to 5 days, you can't pick the biggest deer and say, I'm only going to shoot this one. But he was just so cool. I made the mistake of doing that, which usually doesn't pan out, but it did this time. On this Kansas piece, I actually did use an outfitter. However, it wasn't like that typical outfitter to client relationship where the outfitter does all the work, I show up and sit there and shoot the deer. That is not my style. I've never done that. I don't like doing that. And that wasn't the case with this buck. How it worked for us was I just said, hey, I just want exclusive access to one of your properties, basically like a lease. And he said, okay, so we picked out this farm, and that's where we got this deer going. I did all the work, set up all the cameras, and did all the elbow grease to figure this buck out, which made it even more special to me because he was kind of a surprise for us. We set up cameras early, didn't get him on camera, and then we came back and set up cameras again later, closer to the rut, and he'd moved into the river bottom that we had been running cameras. And this was actually massively huge for us. So once we got him on camera, he wasn't consistent. He was totally nocturnal, which deer like of this caliber, of this age, that's pretty normal. We were like, okay, we can figure this out and try to make it to where we can get him killed. So we rushed in a blind. Pretty crazy, I have to add. And if you guys watch any of our footage of setting up blinds in the past, you know how crazy I am about brushing in blinds. I chopped down half the forest to cover up the blind, but it's worth it because these old bucks have been shot at out of blinds. They've seen this, they've smelled the hunters, and it's really hard to outsmart an old deer doing the basic. And so we went all in, brushed in this blind, right in front of the scrape I got pictures of him in. And we kind of left. We were heading to Nebraska to do some hunting, because honestly, this late in October usually is a great time to hunt, but there was a big warm front. However, a cold front had moved through in Kansas or in Nebraska there. So we didn't have any luck hunting the cold front in Nebraska, but we saw another cold front going through Kansas where we were hunting. So we decided to hop back in the truck and take our little camper back down to Kansas to hunt for a few days. So when we got there, it was awesome setup. I mean, the pressure was high. Everything was going to be great. And I was so excited to be sitting in the blind in hopes that we might get a shot at this buck. At this point, he hasn't been showing up in daylight at all, actually, and he'd been showing up at nighttime, but it was like November 9th with a big cold front, so I was like super excited to be sitting in the blind. So this setup was actually really cool because there's this big river system that flew right down the middle of this river bottom. There's no real good crossings along this river except for this one spot the farmer had made in order to get his tractor into the back field to do some planting or whatever he was going to do. So this crossing was actually a hot spot for these bucks because there was a bedding area just past the crossing. So if a buck wanted to get on the downwind side of the bedding area, he would have to cross this bridge in order to get to the downwind side of this bedding area. So I hoped that he would just come through at least once while we're sitting there. And so on November 9th, it was literally a perfect setup. Super high pressure. The temperature was literally dropping from 40 degrees to like 26. We're talking like insanely perfect conditions. So we were like, we're going to get in there super early. So that's exactly what we did. And we didn't see any deer at first. I was kind of shocked. I was like, oh my gosh, what are we doing? I was like, did we somehow screw this up? I had so much confidence in the setup. It just wasn't working. I was like, dang. And it was getting daylight. It had been daylight for an hour and we haven't even seen a doe. Well, come to find out what was happening was they were still staying on the fields and feeding where we were kind of off the fields, quite honestly, like 300 or 400 yards from where they were feeding. So the deer were still on their feet, which is great. They were just still feeding late into the morning. So literally after like 9 o'clock, it was like a light switch turned on and deer after deer after deer started showing up. It turned out to be one of the most epic mornings I've ever had in the woods.
It has been one amazing morning. Took them a little bit longer, after daylight to get started. But man, once they've been started, it's been crazy. I couldn't tell you how many bucks we've seen. Probably seven bucks at least.
So we started seeing buck after buck showing up, and this was getting really hard because we only had 2 days to hunt. And this was like extremely difficult for me not to shoot this one particular buck that came in because he was literally one of the biggest bucks we had on camera. And it was this big, huge, typical 10. And I was just like, oh my gosh, any other day I would have been like, it is game on. Let's get this 10. And he was mature, but he still needed kind of like one more year. And I was just like, I just went all in. And again, this is a good way to go home with tag soup, especially being a diehard bow hunter like me. I wasn't going to be able to come back with our work schedule. It was all or nothing, and I had 2 days, and I just passed up a huge 10-pointer. And I was like, oh my gosh, please, God, don't let me regret this. So as the morning turned into afternoon, we started seeing less and less bucks and definitely didn't see this guy. But we were still seeing some deer. So we were like torn on whether we should go get food or not. We hadn't packed any lunches or water. And we were like, oh my gosh, are we going to sit all day? And I talked to Sarah. Obviously, she was filming. And I said, you know what, we need to sit all day because we can't take the risk of getting out of the blind in case some of the deer were bedded around us. So we decided to stick it out all day. And thank God we did, because literally at 1 o'clock, middle of the afternoon, that we had does in front of us, and I literally look off to my right and I see this deer standing there at 48 yards, or I think it was like 45. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, it's going to happen. The does are over here to my left. He's over here to my right, and he has to walk right in front of me to get to the does. I'm like, this is going down. I'm like getting all nervous, I'm freaking out because I'm like, oh my gosh, I get my chance at this deer. I can't believe it. He's in daylight. So I'm like getting ready to go full draw, and I'm just like, it's going to happen. And literally the craziest thing happened. All the does that are in front of me, he just stands over there looking all purdy with his rack and everything, all tall and proud, and all those does walk right to him. I was defeated. All the deer walked right to him. They circled around and went out away from us into the field and then kept on going. And I was so heartbroken. I'm like, how did that happen? I'm like, what the heck is going on here? I'm like, come on, it's November 9th. You should be over here chasing and grunting these does. Nothing. And the does went to him, and they left. And I was like, oh my gosh, we still had a chance for them to come back through the afternoon. At least I knew he was in our neck of the neighborhood on the river bottom. And so I thought about switching sets. I thought about a lot of things. I considered a lot, but I decided just to stick there and wait it out. So we literally waited from 1 o'clock to 4 o'clock and didn't see hardly anything. But then right after that, the light switch turned back on and we started seeing more deer. And it got my heart going because we started seeing new bucks and they were coming from the direction that he went. And then I couldn't believe it. This monster buck just pops out of the brush on the other side of the river, walking straight to the crossing that we were sitting right in front of. And I just was like totally elated at this point. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm gonna get my chance to kill this deer. And I'm like getting so excited, and this blind is in a really awkward position because the way the windows were, and how tall I was and the way my chair was, I couldn't shoot sitting down. So I had to get out of my chair and get on my knees. And so like, I'm ready. I'm thinking he's gonna come right in front of us. And he did what a lot of old deer do. He kind of just circled the area and then he turned. And when he was circling us, he was at 48 yards. I'm like, oh my gosh, I'm going to have to shoot this deer at almost 50 yards. I'm like, this is not going to be good. And there was this one moment when he turned, and it literally was like slow motion for me because he turned and he faced me, and he had this huge frame, like just monster frame. And he's just looking at me, and he's turning and walking, and then he turned back, going right in front of me. And that was the moment I knew. I'm like, he's going to come within 30 yards. I'm going to get my chance. And my heart started beating into my neck. You guys know that feeling. I was like, it's beating. My body's full of adrenaline, and I'm like going full draw. And I'm just like, oh my gosh, I can't screw this up. You know, he's like at 28 yards. The buck of my life at this point. You know, I'm like, I cannot mess this up. And so I go full draw. And this was before I had the nose button. This is a great example of what happens in these awkward situations. So I go full draw, and I'm like all kind of on my knees, twisted in the blind, and I evidently didn't anchor correctly because I buried the pin right behind his shoulder. And when I cut it loose, I was shooting a finger at the time, an index release. When I cut it loose, it hit him way back, and I played it off in the video like I wasn't really worried about it after it hit him, but I'm telling you, I was freaking out. I'm like, great, I just gut shot the biggest deer in my life. Like, how could I make such a bad shot on a deer? And I was so worried. And then I thought about him as he ran off. When he ran off, there was a lot of blood flow coming out of him. There was a lot. And that doesn't happen with, hard liver hits or gut shots. So I knew I didn't get gut. And I was like, maybe I clipped liver, but I had to have clipped lung. And I was like freaking out inside. And I'm looking at the camera, and I'm trying not to show you guys, how scared I was at the moment, because I was like, oh my gosh, I just made a terrible shot on this deer. And I'm like, keep looking out there to see if I can see him, and I can't see him, and I'm just trying to play it off with you guys. And then there was a moment where I just leaned out a little bit further, where I could see just a little bit further, and he was standing right there. I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, he's still right there. And I'm like, okay, I can see him. This is great. And then he turns, and he looks like he's going to walk back because he had no idea what happened. I didn't mat and stop him or anything. I just shot him. He had no idea. Well, come to find out, my arrow went right through the top back of both of his lungs. And you can kind of see that actually when the arrow goes through. You can kind of see that pink mist come out the back of him. We'll kind of slow that down for you to really see it. And that pink mist comes out the back, and that's a tall tale sign that's perfect lung shot. And I got very lucky. I'm not going to sit over here and say I was some hero in this and made a great shot, and that's where I was aiming, because it wasn't. I was aiming right tight behind the shoulder. I just got lucky with this, I'll be honest. And what happened, he ran out there and he didn't know what was going on. Well, he turned back to kind of see what was going on, and I could see his back end started getting a little bit wobbly on me, and I was just like freaking out. You can see in the video, because it's all filmed live, my eyes are like this big, and I'm just like, and I see him, and he goes, boom, and he tips over right in front of me, 30 yards away, and I see him go down, and my heart just exploded. You can see the emotion on camera.
He just went down. Oh my gosh, I just killed a giant. Yes. Oh my god, I just saw him go down. Can you believe that? Give me something.
This was just the highlight of our 2017 season because it had been absolute crap until then. And it was awesome. All that emotion came out. I was so excited for it. And to put my hands on this big giant buck was just unbelievable. It was a buck we went after, we targeted, we put in the work, we built the blind, we did everything, and it paid off. And you guys know when that happens, no matter the size of the deer, if it's the one that you're targeting, that emotional response is just amazing. And that connection you have with that animal is just beyond anything that you can even describe to you guys until you experience it yourself. And that's what I had with this buck. It was awesome. And I remember going up there and picking it up, and I was so excited to share that moment with my wife. And I was just beyond grateful to harvest such a deer. And honestly, guys, this buck is still one of my top favorite bow hunts of all time. Anyway, I hope you enjoyed this Bowmar breakdown. And if you haven't already, please hit that subscribe button and turn on the bell notification so you're always tuned into our channel. And as always, guys, thank you so much for enjoying our content and staying tuned in with us, because Sarah and I really appreciate it, and we're very grateful for your support.